My name is Willa Calder. 2 weeks before I was supposed to leave for college, I logged into the student portal to check my housing assignment. And I was not enrolled, not flagged. Not pending. Not missing a payment. My enrollment simply was not there. I refreshed the page, logged out and back in, and checked that I was on the right site. Half my life was already packed in boxes around my bedroom. Then I called admissions. The woman on the phone asked for my date of birth. I heard her typing. Then the typing stopped. She told me my enrollment had not been canceled. It had been deferred for 1 full academic year at my request, and the deferral had been approved. She was reading the confirmation on her screen as she spoke. I told her I had never requested anything. There was a pause. She put me on hold. I stood in the middle of my room with a box of towels at my feet and the hold music playing, staring at a packing list that said sheets, mattress pad, shower shoes. When she came back, she told me the form had been submitted through my own student account, with my electronic signature. In May, I did not cry. I thanked her, said I would call back, and hung up. I know now what that was. I run a high school in Ohio, and part of that job, more of it than anyone imagines before taking it, is collecting signatures, permission slips, enrollment paperwork, financial aid forms, college applications with a line at the bottom where a student swears the information is true. I have watched students receive terrible news in my office. Shock on a well-behaved teenager does not always look like panic. Sometimes it looks like manners. There is a rule in my building that everybody knows, and a few people gently make fun of. I do not sign anything with a student's name on it unless that student is standing in the room. Not their parent. Them. I have never told the staff where that rule came from. I am going to tell you. My aunt's name was Ottilie. She was my mother's older sister. She never married, and she taught in the same district for close to 40 years before retiring to a small house at the edge of town with a porch that always needed painting. From the time I was small, she took me every other weekend. It was not a rescue arrangement. Nobody was hurting me. My mother needed a break with 2 children and a difficult job, and then those Saturdays simply became the shape of my life. Ottilie made bread every Saturday morning. Not as a hobby, just the way some people make coffee. She gave me the piece of dough too small to become a loaf and let me do whatever I wanted with it. What came out of the oven usually looked like an accident. She ate it anyway. Her kitchen had a radio on the windowsill that barely picked anything up, and a wooden table with a burn ring from something that happened before I was born. She never covered the mark. When I asked why, she said the table still worked. She had a room she called mine. A bed with a quilt that smelled like the cedar chest, a lamp, and a shelf where the books I left stayed exactly where I had put them. One morning, when I was still young enough to need a ride there, she stopped kneading dough and worked a key off her ring. It had a green plastic tag, the free kind from a hardware store. She pushed it across the table. "You shouldn't have to knock at a house where you've got a room," she said. Then she went back to the bread as if she had handed me a fork. "Hold on to that key. It comes back." Ottilie fed me, asked actual questions, and waded through the whole answer. She let me sit at her table and be a complete person for 2 days. She did not buy me things. She did not try to become my mother. And in all those years, she never said one word against my parents. As a child, I thought that meant there was nothing to say. As an adult, I understood it as restraint. She must have seen the machinery of our family long before I had words for it. And she chose not to make a child carry what she knew. My brother Nolan was older than me. Nolan was the family project. That is the kindest way I know how to say it. He was not cruel to me. In fact, he could be generous and funny, and when he walked into a room, people leaned toward him. That mattered because favoritism is harder to name when the favored person is someone you also love. He had plans, and the plans always required something, and the something was always found. Money for culinary school, money for equipment, money for his first lease. My parents enjoyed supporting him. A son with big plans gave them something to talk about at church, and Nolan was genuinely charming. There is nothing more expensive in a family than a charming child. I was not mistreated. I was fed, clothed, and driven places. I was simply quiet. And quiet children are restful. Restful children get overlooked in ways nobody ever has to apologize for. My father Curtis handled all the paperwork in our house: taxes, insurance, registrations, school forms, medical releases. It was efficient, and it did not look sinister. He liked things done correctly and did not trust anyone else to do them. By 18, I had never completed a form by myself. He created my college application accounts. He entered the financial aid information. The email address attached to everything was one he made, with a password he chose, because he was the person who needed access to handle things. At the time, it felt like competence. My friends complained about forms and deadlines. I never had to. I thought I was lucky. I did not understand that every small task he removed from my hands also removed one more chance for me to learn where my own name was being used. I meet versions of that father every week now. A parent takes over because the paperwork is boring, the child is busy, and doing it for them seems helpful. Without meaning to, they teach the child that her name is a household resource, something stored in a drawer with the insurance documents. Nobody in my family ever said that aloud. Nobody had to. Audley's heart gave out during the winter of my senior year. It was fast, and she was alone. I have made a kind of peace with that, but not a complete one. Her will was read in an office above a dry cleaner, with folding chairs and a radiator that came on and off while we sat there. The room smelled faintly of starch and hot dust. It was such an ordinary place to hear the last decisions of the most important person in my life. That was where I met Miriam. She was in her 70s, retired, and had drafted the will as a favor to a woman she had known for years. She read it in a flat voice with no ceremony. At 18, I decided she was cold. I was wrong, but I had just buried the person who ate my terrible bread, and I thought anyone who was not crying had failed some test. Audley did not leave a fortune. She left her house to her church and the money she had saved patiently from a teacher's salary over 40 years, $180,000. All of it went into a trust for one purpose: my education. The trust named my mother to manage it until I turned 25. That was an ordinary arrangement for a girl still in high school. Nobody had been careless. I remember very little of the room while Miriam read. I was looking at my hands, trying not to make a sound, so I missed whatever my mother's face did when she heard the amount and whatever Nolan's did when he heard the purpose. On the way out, Nolan put his arm around my shoulders and said the old girl had come through. I believe he was happy for me that day, before anyone had done anything. That March, I got into the school I had wanted for years. I read the first line of the acceptance letter over and over because my eyes would not hold still. Then I ran through the house. My mother hugged me and said Audley would have been proud. She cried a little, and I believe that part was real. People can love you and still participate in harming you. It took me years to stop treating those two facts as if only one could be true. My father asked about deadlines, because deadlines were his department. I handed him the letter, and he took care of everything through the end of April. Confirmation, deposit, housing. I never saw a single page. Nobody celebrated either. There was no dinner. Nolan sent a thumbs up hours later. That night, I woke for water and heard my parents talking quietly in the kitchen. I stopped in the dark hallway. I could not make out the words, only the steady rhythm of two people working through something practical. There was no anger in it. No shock. Just the low, even sound of a decision being assembled. I told myself they were discussing how proud they were, and I went back to bed. I was 18. I had everything I wanted, and a dead woman had paid for it. I did not yet understand that a quiet house is not always a peaceful one. That brings me back to the moment I hung up with admissions. I went to the garage and found my father at his workbench. He did not deny it. He wiped his hands on a rag, leaned back, and explained the decision the way he would explain a repair to the roof. Then he went to the shelf where he kept the household files and brought down a folder. The restaurant was going under. It had been failing since winter, and I had not known because nobody told the 18-year-old anything. Nolan had personally guaranteed a loan. A supplier had already stopped deliveries once. My father had written everything out in columns with amounts and dates. The numbers were real. My brother was weeks from losing the business with debts attached to his own name, and my father had been doing arithmetic in that garage for months. The money was sitting there, he said. Sitting there, like a car nobody was driving. 1 year. Nolan would stabilize the restaurant, repay the trust, and I would begin school the following fall. 12 months later, everything would be the same. He said it with such confidence that for a few seconds I tried to enter the future he was describing. I tried to see myself arriving 1 year later, grateful that everybody had survived, but every version of that future began with me agreeing that the choice had been theirs to make. I asked why nobody had asked me. He did not pause. Because we knew what you'd say. They knew I would say no, so they did not ask. And because my father had created every account I owned, they did not need me to say anything at all. The concrete felt cold through my shoes, which is a strange thing to remember in August. I could not take a full breath and turned it into a cough so he would not see. In that first hour, it was not even about school. A document existed with my name at the bottom, changing the direction of my life, and the thing that made it official was a signature that was supposed to be mine. My whole life had a signature line, and other people had been writing on it. I called Miriam that evening. She lived outside town. She told me to come without asking questions. I drove there in my mother's car with pages I had printed at the library, because I would not use the printer at home. At every red light, I touched the green tag on my keyring. Audley's house had already been listed. I had not used that key in months, but I had never taken it off. Miriam met me on the porch with tea, which I did not want and drank anyway. Her reading glasses seemed to be on every other surface, and a tomato plant in a bucket beside the steps was doing better than it had any right to. She read every page slowly, with a finger under the lines, going back to the beginning more than once. She did not react while she read. The longer she remained quiet, the harder it became to sit still. When she finished, she squared the pages and gave me 3 things in a voice so calm it frightened me more than anger would have. The trust allowed payments for my education and nothing else. A loan to my brother's restaurant was not a gray area. It was outside the document. My mother, as trustee, owed a duty to me and nobody else. She had broken it. Then Miriam put her hand flat on the deferral form. The money will come back. Money usually does. But somebody signed your name to a document that changed the direction of your life, and there is no version of that which is a favor. I asked whether I should be angry about the money. The money is the smallest thing on this table. A former colleague of hers could move quickly. They could freeze the trust account and place a hold on the proceeds of any restaurant sale within days. A full accounting and removal of my mother as trustee would take longer, but the door could be shut inside a week. Then Miriam asked what I wanted to do. I told her I needed to think. She did not call me naive, though I was. She gave me her home number on the back of an envelope even though it was already in my phone and told me to call when I knew, any hour. What I did next was wait. I told myself I was thinking. I was hoping. There is a difference. Thinking gathers facts and moves toward a decision. Hoping rearranges the same facts until somebody else becomes the person you needed them to be. I waited for my mother to come into my room, sit on the bed, and say she had made a terrible mistake. I rehearsed how gracious I would be. In every conversation I imagined, she apologized, and I forgave her quickly, and we fixed it together so I could still be a person who had a family. She never came in. Nobody did. My mother asked twice in passing whether I was all right, once in the hallway and once while unloading groceries. Both times I said I was fine. Both times she accepted it. That was another thing I learned later. People who truly want an answer do not accept the first one that lets them leave. The day I was supposed to leave came and went. My boxes stayed stacked against the wall. I remained in bed until noon, and nobody in that house said one word about it. That silence told me more than any conversation we had all summer. And in the middle of those days, I drove to the restaurant. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the dead hour, with only a couple of tables occupied. I sat in the parking lot longer than I meant to. I did not go in to confront anyone, and I had no speech prepared. I think some part of me needed to see the thing my aunt's 40 years had become, because until then, it had only been a number in a legal document. It was a wall. They had installed a new walk-in cooler. From the dining room, I could see the stainless steel door, the handle still covered in the plastic film from the manufacturer. New sheet pans sat on a rack, bright and unwarped. Boxes by the back door still had shipping labels attached. That was Ottilie's 40 years. Every Saturday, every check she had not spent on herself. Standing in a kitchen as a cooler, with plastic still on the handle. Nolan came out, saw me, and his whole face opened. He was pleased. That is the part that has never stopped being awful. He hugged me, offered me food, and showed me the cooler. He was proud of how much spoilage it would prevent. He did not know I knew. He believed the arrangement was fine because our parents had handled it, and everything our parents handled was fine. He had spent his life not asking where a thing came from when it arrived. That did not make him innocent. It made him familiar. In our family, Nolan's need had always been treated as an emergency, and the source of the solution was someone else's private concern. I sat at the bar and ate something he made. He stood there waiting to see whether I liked it. I said it was good, and it was. Then I drove home. That was the day I stopped hoping. Not the garage. Not the phone call. That plate. At the end of the week, my father said the family needed to meet the following Sunday at the restaurant. There was a document, he said. Something for the file, so there would be no confusion later. He used the tone of a man scheduling an oil change. Standing in our kitchen, I understood immediately. They wanted me to sign a paper saying I had willingly given Nolan the money, so the thing they had already taken would become a thing I had handed over. The forgery had gotten them through the first door. Now they needed my real signature to make the room look legitimate. They wanted my signature after all. Now that it was worth something, I called Miriam that night and told her to go ahead. Then I waited out the week and went to Sunday dinner. The restaurant sat on a corner in a neighborhood that had been about to turn around for a decade. It was closed on Sundays, so it was just the four of us at the large table by the window, with chairs still upside down on the tables behind us. Nolan cooked. He is a genuinely good cook. That was never the problem. The first part of the evening was not tense. That was what I had not prepared for. It was nice. The room smelled like butter and roasted garlic. Outside, people passed the dark windows without looking in. For a while, we were simply a family eating food my brother had made. My mother told a story about someone at work. My father complained about a road closure. Nolan kept bringing out dishes and watching our faces to see whether we liked them, the way he had since he was a kid. At one point, my mother moved my hair off my shoulder and asked whether I was sleeping enough. I ate everything. I was 18, my brother had cooked, and I was hungry. They waited until the plates were pushed back. Then my father reached into a bag by his feet and took out a new folder. I remember thinking somebody had gone to a store and bought a folder for this. I let them talk. I did not interrupt, and I have always been grateful for that, because I heard the entire argument they had built around me. If I had spoken too soon, they might have edited themselves. Silence gave me the uncut version. My father explained the document. It said I had voluntarily made the funds available to help family, that nobody had acted improperly, and that I understood and approved how the money had been used. Nolan turned his phone around to show me projections for lunch service. He said he would pay back every cent. I believe he meant it while he was saying it, which is separate from whether it would ever have happened. My mother talked about family. She said this was what families did. Someday, when I was older, I would understand that you could not keep score with people you loved. What she meant was that I should not count what had been taken from me. Nobody at that table seemed concerned that they had counted every dollar they needed from my trust. Then my father slid the folder across the table with a pen resting on top. I looked at the pen for a moment and pushed the folder back. I'm not signing it. My father began explaining again, more slowly, as if I had failed to understand the first time. He got halfway through a sentence before Nolan's phone rang. Nolan looked at the screen. Something shifted across his face. He stood and walked toward the kitchen, and we listened to him repeat the same words. Wait. Say that again. When? No, say it again. He returned, holding the phone against his chest. He did not look at our parents. He looked at me, and I watched him understand in real time. The account had been frozen. There was a hold on the proceeds of any sale of the restaurant. His accountant had been trying to reach him and finally used the emergency number. I had known before I walked in. I had eaten the meal. I did not stand and announce anything. There was nobody there to perform for. It was 4 people, a row of upside-down chairs, and a pen lying on a plate. My father got loud first. He asked how I could do this to my own brother. He said the restaurant employed people, that Nolan had obligations, that one selfish decision could ruin several lives. Then he said I had gone behind their backs. That phrase landed with a very particular unfairness coming from the man who had signed my name in May. Nolan sat down and covered his face. After a long time, he said my name once, not as a question. Then, nothing. My mother said nothing until my father ran himself out. Then she folded her napkin, placed it beside her plate, and spoke in the ordinary voice she used for grocery lists. She had known everything. She had seen the deferral form before it was submitted. She had approved the withdrawal because she was the trustee. She had not been tricked, pressured, or worn down. She had considered it and decided. I asked how she could do that. Because Nolan had more to lose. That was the whole reason. He had the restaurant, the loan, the employees, a life with debts attached to it. I was 18 and had nothing yet, so I was the person who could afford to wait. My future was still invisible to her. His mistakes had invoices, payroll, and a commercial lease, so they looked more real. In her arithmetic, I was not being robbed. I was being asked to absorb the loss because I had the most give. Some people hear that and think it is monstrous. Others recognize their own mother's voice. I have sat across from enough parents in my office to know how often the quiet child becomes the family reserve, the one expected to wait, understand, surrender, and call it maturity. My mother was not lying to me. She was telling me exactly where I stood in that family, and she believed it was reasonable. I left before dessert, which Nolan had made. I have sometimes wondered whether he threw it away. A few blocks later, I pulled over on a residential street. Someone's sprinkler was running. I sat in my mother's car and shook for a while, and that was the only time during the entire thing that my body got a turn. The legal part was less dramatic than people imagine. Admissions was the easiest piece. I called and told a different woman the truth. She asked several questions, went quiet for a moment, and then told me a deferral requested by somebody other than the student was not really a deferral. It was a piece of data with a problem attached to it. They corrected it within a day. I could not begin in September because housing was gone and schedules were full, so I started in January. Run term, late, written down. That does not sound like much. It was not nothing. A semester is a small unit on a transcript and a large unit when you are 18 and watching everyone else leave without you. I entered in the middle of a year after everyone else had built friendships and routines. I spent that first year slightly outside everything. I became very good at eating alone, which is a skill and not one I would have chosen. The restaurant sold that autumn. It did not sell for much. By then, the supplier problems and debt were visible to any serious buyer, and the business Nolan had tried to save no longer looked like the future my parents had described. The hold was honored, and between the sale proceeds and the repayments that followed the accounting, the trust was restored over the following months. My mother was removed as trustee without much of a fight because the document said education and the money had gone into a walk-in cooler. A bank trust department took over. It charged a small fee every year and was worth every cent, because the answer to the question of who controlled my money became nobody at that dinner table. The day I left for school, nobody came to the driveway. My father was at work. My mother stood in the kitchen doorway with a dish towel and told me to drive safely. Nolan called while I was on the road, somewhere in the second state. I almost did not answer. He did not apologize exactly. I do not think he yet understood what the apology would have been for. He asked whether I had enough money. I said I did. We talked about nothing for a while, and it was the kindest anyone in my family had been to me that year. He works in kitchens now, good ones. He is a much better employee than he was an owner, and I do not say that unkindly. We speak sometimes. My father has not handled anyone else's paperwork since. Not because of a moral awakening. He had always held the pen because everyone trusted him. Once that trust was gone, nobody handed it back. My mother has never apologized. Not once, in any form, on any holiday. She has occasionally said she wishes things had happened differently, which is not the same as wishing she had chosen differently. I stopped waiting a long time ago. I am not brave about that. It is simply what happened to the hope. It became thinner, and then it was gone. There was one more thing. I did not learn about it until the trust was settled. Ottilie had left a sealed envelope with Miriam. The instructions were specific. It came to me when I enrolled somewhere. Not when I turned 18, not when Ottilie died. When I actually enrolled. I opened it in January in a dorm room, sitting on a bare mattress with my suitcase still zipped. The room smelled like industrial cleaner. Voices moved up and down the hallway, people who already seemed to know where they belonged. I didn't leave you money. I left you an exit, somewhere to go, so nobody ever gets to decide your life for you while you sit there and let them. She had written it at the kitchen table with the burn ring, in her own handwriting, without knowing what my parents would do, that May Ottilie had spent 40 years watching families from the front of a classroom. She had watched parents answer for children shrink around louder siblings, and quiet students become convenient because they did not resist. She made her sister the trustee because that was the sensible legal arrangement. Then she placed the word education into the document like a lock on a door, and wrote me a letter meant to open only when I had made it out. I have never decided how much she suspected. I still have the key with the green tag. The house sold years ago. A family lives there now with a trampoline in the yard. The porch has finally been painted. I noticed that the one time I drove past and have not done it again. The key does not open anything on this earth. It stays on my ring anyway, beside the keys to a building full of students. So now you know where my rule comes from. Last spring, a girl sat across from my desk with a scholarship application her father had already completed. His handwriting ran down every line. Her name was on the signature line in his hand because he was busy, she was busy, and it was easier. He was sitting beside her, good intentions all over his face. I did not lecture him. He was not a bad man. I meet versions of that parent every week. Half are mothers. Most are exhausted. All believe they are helping. I printed a clean copy and placed it in front of the girl. Then I handed her the pen from my desk. I'll wait. She looked at me as if I were making her do a chore. Her father looked at me as if I were being difficult. I let both of them be annoyed. A few minutes of inconvenience was a price I was willing to pay for her to see every line attached to her own name. I have been called difficult in that office more times than I can count. I have made peace with it, because difficult is often what careful looks like from the outside. That girl has no idea what I handed her. If I do my job properly, she never will. The point is that she gets to grow up assuming her name belongs to her. If somebody once made a decision about your life without asking, tell me what you would say now to the younger version of yourself who was too polite to know that manners were not going to save her. And tell me this, do you believe someone can truly be helping you if they never let you choose? If you have ever had to reclaim a part of your life that someone else tried to control, you belong here. Subscribe to Rose Untold Stories and stay for the next story.